All right, we're going to be learning absolute value today. And the notation that's used for absolute value is 2 long bars. Okay, so that's really important that we can see those long bars and recognize that as meaning absolute value. So for example, if we saw it on a page, it would look something like this. So I would have a number on the inside, and then I would have 2 bars on either end that are both taller and longer than my number, okay? And it's important when you're writing that you make it come above the number and below the number so that it doesn't look like a number 1. So you would say this, the absolute value of, and then blank, whatever number's inside, and in this case, it would be the absolute value of 2. And what the absolute value is, it's actually the distance a number is from 0. Okay, so we're going to use yellow because that's an important vocab word. So absolute value is the distance of a number from 0, okay? So if we look at this, if we look at our number 2 and we plot it here, we can see that 1, 2, it has a distance of 2. So the absolute value of 2 is simply 2, okay? So for example, 5, if we look at 5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of 5 is 5. Now, if we look at -5 and plot that on our number line, we can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of -5 is also 5, okay? So just like when I'm walking, right? So if I walked 3 steps forward, 1, 2, 3, you would say that I walked 3 feet, okay? But if I turn around and I walk backwards 1, 2, 3 feet again, you wouldn't say that I walked -3 feet, right? You would just say, oh, she walked another 3 feet, okay? Because it doesn't matter if I walk east, west, north, south, right? It doesn't matter the direction that I'm walking. I'm always going to say that I'm walking a positive amount. You've never heard anyone say, oh, I walked -7 miles today after school, or I went on a run and ran -2 miles, right? You've never heard anyone say that because it doesn't make sense. Distance is always positive, okay? So that's something that's really important to remember. Let's put a bubble for that. Distance is always positive. And because the absolute value is a distance, that means the absolute value will also always be positive. I made my little bubble a little too small, so we're going to make that a little bigger. There we go. Okay, so again, because distance is always positive and absolute value is a distance, that means that your absolute value is always going to be positive, okay? Which we see here, the absolute value of +5 is 5. Absolute value of -5 is also 5, okay? So your absolute value is always going to be positive because it represents a distance, okay? So distance is always positive. Therefore, absolute value is always positive as well. Okay, so that's a really important piece to understand. Okay. All right. So if we find the absolute value of 9, it's simply going to be 9. If I look at the absolute value of -3, right, we're thinking about -3, how far is it from 0? It's 1, 2, 3 jumps. So the absolute value is +3. Okay, if we're looking at 0, obviously 0 is 0, right? There's no distance. And again, absolute value of -3/4, it's simply going to be +3/4 because it's always positive. Okay, so your absolute value is always going to be positive again. The only exception to this is, well, there's not really an exception, it's just you might see a different problem. Let's say I have problem E. If I have the negative absolute value of, let's say, -5, okay? So my negative is outside of my absolute value bars, so that's going to stay the same. When I actually look inside my absolute value bars, I see I'm looking at the absolute value of -5, which is then going to be +5. Okay, so because this negative is on the outside of my absolute value bar, that's the only reason I wind up with a negative answer. Okay, so again, let's say I have negative absolute value of 3. Okay, my absolute value is on the outside, so it's not impacting my absolute value. Once I look on the inside, the absolute value of 3 is 3, but again, I had that negative on the outside that I had to carry. Okay, so that is absolute value. The next thing that we're going to be going into today is opposites, right? So when we think about the word opposite, just in basic ELA, right, we know the opposite means something completely different. So the opposite of having to wear glasses is that you don't have to wear glasses. The opposite of being tall is that you're maybe shorter. The opposite of me having blonde hair is that someone has brown or black hair, okay? So opposites are the complete different, okay? All right. So if I look at my, let me start by highlighting my title. I think I forgot to do that for absolute value. Let me go back to that. Okay. So when I'm thinking about an opposite is a number and its opposite are the same distance from 0 in either directions. Okay, so opposites have the same absolute value. Okay, so if we look here, we're going to plot an example. I have the opposite of 4 is -4. Because if I plot 4, I can see it's 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps from my 0. And if I plot -4, 1, 2, 3, 4, it is also 4 jumps from my 0, right? So opposites, again, are the same distance from 0 in either direction or opposite directions, okay? So if I start at 0 and I go 4 to the right and 4 to the left, I wind up at 4 and -4, okay? I just have to make sure that I'm traveling the same distance, okay? So again, the opposite of -2 is +2, because if I plot -2, I can see that it takes me 1, 2 jumps to get to my 0 point. And if I plot +2, it takes me 1, 2 jumps to get to my 0 spot as well, okay? So 2 and -2 are considered opposites. Now, the only exception is if I'm at 0, right? We know 0 is neither negative nor positive. It's neutral. It's always our starting point right in the middle. So if I'm already at 0, then there is no opposite of 0, right? It's just 0. 0 is 0, okay? All right. So pretty simple concept. Lastly, the negative symbol also means opposite, okay? So for example, if I'm saying I see a negative sign outside of my number 5, this means the opposite of 5, which is negative 5. So this opposite of 5 is negative 5. Okay, and I see that opposite right here. Okay, now this is saying the opposite of negative 5, what's in parentheses, is positive 5. Okay, so if you want to take a different color, we can highlight this one. This is important. Okay, so the negative symbol also means opposite, which we see again right here. Okay, and it means the opposite of something, which is how you can read it. All right, so you guys are going to be doing an independent worksheet based off of this. It'll be the one up on the front under the board. It's the second pile, the one that says opposites and absolute values practice page. And that's just going to go through and you're going to have some problems to be able to practice the absolute value and the opposites, okay?